I grew up in Akron during the 20s and 30s in the middle of a block surrounded by College, Mill, Union, and Market streets, in a former farmhouse owned by the Hull family. My father was a master plumber, my mother was a former dressmaker, and my older sister Jean, my brother Robert, and I completed the family. Because our house was in the center of a block, we had seclusion, along with access to all kinds of entertainment. We lived on South College Place, which ran parallel to the alley and ended at our barn. Robert built the Mosquito Valley Railroad. It ran the length of the front yard to the apartment house on College Street. The tracks were 2x4s, and the engine and cars large wooden boxes with real wheels Papa found at a salvage company. The train was powered by my brother pushing the rear car with a long pole. There must have been an incline one way because he was kept pretty busy getting up steam. And because fare was very cheap, the numerous apartment-dwelling kids were enthusiastic customers. Robert printed tickets with his small printing set. I was the ticket seller, and all of the neighborhood kids helped at times. When he was old enough to cross the street without supervision, he used to walk 1 block to the right, where Market Street Bridge went over the railroad tracks, and he would spend hours just sitting up there and watching the trains go by. Ethel Richardson, 1925.
Why chase trains? Why put so much effort and time into photographing locomotives, interurbans, and trains? The simplest answer would be from the obvious fact that most of us acquire a lifelong interest in some avocation that to others is a puzzle. Why we select a particular interest as a hobby is something that is indeed an enigma and baffling to explain. With me, I suppose it all began on Memorial Day of 1931, when I rode the final train on Ohio's last narrow-gauge railroad. Up to that date, I had always expressed a fascination with railroads, and I had spent many an hour or day just watching them. However, on that day, it was different, for I had taken the family Kodak camera along and used up an entire roll of film. So, armed with a folding Kodak 3A camera, I started taking pictures of railroad scenes. The infamous Great Depression was on, and there were few dollars available for film. My subjects were picked with care, and my travels were limited by that depression. Even so, many a tank of gasoline, at 19 cents a gallon, was wasted in the pursuit of elusive steam locomotives and electric interurbans. It was April of 1942, and I was inducted into the Army at Columbus, Ohio. I provided the members of the Columbus Philatelic Club with some amusement at my ill-fitting soldier suit. For the next 2.5 years, as a member of the 95th Signal Battalion, I was assigned at various locations in Iran. I enjoyed several trips on the Iran State Railways from the desert terminal of Awaz to Tehran. A week of passes enabled me to explore Cairo, take a trip inside a pyramid, see the minarets of the citadel, the railway, and archaeological museums, and explore some of the streetcar and suburban lines. Then, on July 14th, we sailed for home. After discharge and on a 30-day leave, I promptly got acclimated to U.S. railroads by riding the switchback line to Tremont and stopping over at Mount Union to ride to East Broad Top in Pennsylvania. And then, home at last on the Pensie's accommodation, completing an around-the-world trip via the United States Army Travel Agency. Following World War II, I went back to work at Cyberling Tire Company in Akron, Ohio. Prior to moving out to Colorado, I had spent 5 vacations out in the state, and, like most rail fans, I had devoted most of that time to exploring the 700 miles of remaining narrow gauge. Well, the future prospects of Cyberling Tire Company following the war weren't looking too well, and I was starting to think about moving on. I soon readily assented to a proposition from a partner to go and build and operate a motel. We had found that the state was very short in tourist accommodations, and it wasn't all unusual for tourists out in Colorado to spend the night sleeping in their cars. A good friend talked me into helping build a motel in Motel Short, Colorado. We checked out the various places on the narrow gauge, trying to determine which would be the best for year-round business, and finally settled on Alamosa. The motel opened for business in the summer of 1949 with but just 10 units, and we eventually added a number more, equipped just for the summer trade. In July of 1953, we opened the Narrow Gauge Museum, having meantime built a replica of the Mancos Depot for our office, living quarters, and museum. But Alamosa was a poor place for even a free museum for visitors. In 1958, I sold out my share of ownership in the motel, and with Cornelius Houck of Cincinnati, we started the Colorado Railroad Museum at Golden. My involvement with preservation of things on wheels that had operated in the vanishing Colorado narrow gauge lines actually began in 1951 when I purchased locomotive 346 from the scrapyard. Well, it is true that if I had not been foolish enough to scrape up the money, time, and work to save a lot of stuff, it would not have been saved. However, we are all young and foolish at some age, I guess. In Colorado, part of it was that I remembered how many times we fans back east were saddened by our inability to save favorite engines, railroad cars, and interurban trolleys from destruction. Probably that's why so many fans kept urging me to save this or that, or even though not only a few ever contributed anything to do so, you will find very few pictures in my collection of such sad scenes. Most of us did not linger when such things were to occur. When engine 346 came to Durango after I purchased it, on a Rio Grande Southern freight flat car on that rainy day so long ago, one man actually came up and hugged me. He was so carried away with emotion. A railroad man had just told him, "No, that engine isn't en route to be cut up. That man Bob Richardson over there just bought it to preserve it. In 1974, a television production crew came out to the museum and said that they wanted to film part of a Johnny Cash special right on the museum grounds. They intended to show a Wild West robbery scene, and, well, I was talked into being the conductor that got held up.
When the cowboys finally got into town, there was a lot of raising Cain and letting off steam, and most of it was innocent enough. But there was a kind of raising Cain that wasn't quite so innocent. Trains went back east in Chicago, loaded down with cattle. Came back out west, loaded down with guns, gamblers, girls, and gold. The wealthy passengers and the strong boxes full of money were mighty easy pickings for people like Jesse and Frank James, the younger brothers, Blackjack Ketchum, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. Men that became feared, a new breed of man called train robbers.
It wasn't easy to establish a nonprofit institution, but eventually we formed the Colorado Rail Historical Foundation to take over the museum. In all, I spent 33 years at Golden as manager and executive director. I intended to retire sooner, but various plans to do so didn't work out until I was finally able to retire to my native Pennsylvania in 1991. I must have set a record for heading a railroad museum that many years. It was a great experience, and I have to say that things never got dull nor boring. In 60 years of photographic activity, it should be clear that, well, I've taken as many duds as anyone else, and have had disasters to equal others. I'm just grateful that most of the time the camera just grabbed what was hoped for. Above all else, I kept in mind that it was only a hobby, not a matter of life and death, so I seldom found myself being grimly serious in the pursuit. Still, nearly all of it was fun, and some latter-day satisfaction comes from seeing the photographic successes giving pleasure to others by appearing in railroad books.
Riding on the city of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday morning rail. cars and 15 restless riders, 3 conductors, 25 sacks of men. All along the southbound Odyssey, the train pulls out at Kankakee and rolls along past houses, farms, and fields, passing trains that have no name, freight yards full of old black men, and the graveyards of their rusted automobiles. Good morning, America, how are you? Said, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. I'll be gone